Yes.
Susan, could you, was Leopold influenced by Pinchot in his early career, and, you know, that school of forestry, and if so, how did he move away from that sort of commodity-oriented approach?
You know, he was very influenced by Pinchot. Pinchot had endowed the Yale Forest School. He knew Pinchot. He had correspondence with Pinchot. He brought Pinchot to Wisconsin to speak for that, you know, for establishing a conservation commission in Wisconsin in 1927. He probably interacted with him when he was in the Forest Service earlier than that too. And he was quite commodity-oriented in his early days, but his characteristic was always pushing the Forest Service farther and faster than it wanted to go. He was always dissatisfied, and he was always pushing. So when the Forest Service, the reason we have that film, Green Fire, is that the Forest Service had produced their centennial film and used Leopold as the counterpoint to Pinchot in that film in order to introduce tension into the film. And because Leopold was the one who was always needling, who was always trying to get it to change its policies and to get it adopt a broader view, to accept responsibility, for example, for erosion on watersheds. Forest Service didn't think they should have any responsibility for that. You just plant the trees and keep the trees there, and that'll protect the watersheds, and if it doesn't, they're not meant to be protected. I mean, they didn't want to accept responsibility, and that's why Leopold started talking about an ethic, about conservation as a moral issue, because he wanted to get to these people. And so he was always pushing them. And yet I'm certain that he had a respect for Pinchot as well. And a lot of the more recent work that's been done on Pinchot shows that it wasn't strictly commodity, that Pinchot also thought more broadly in many aspects.
I was just curious, we talked a lot about Missouri and some of the national level things that were going on. I think back to the 30s, the country's in the bouts of the Great Depression. Serious droughts are going on all across the country. Wildlife's at an all-time low. What was the secret sauce that allowed these people to come together and change things so profoundly that now we just assume it's like the status quo has always been this way? But you look at not just state level, but federal level programs that continue to make conservation a priority. And it seems almost impossible when you listen to NPR on any given day and all you're hearing about is the failure of, insert large institution or country here. It's like, what was the secret sauce back then that made them capable of such greatness?
I think a certain amount of sense of crisis, of desperation, but there was also, the beginnings of a sense that what we have dismantled, degraded, we ought to be able to put back together again. I mean, that was Leopold's philosophy, and that's what he was trying to do in Wisconsin. And if he didn't come to Missouri, if he was invited, then he turned them down, and I don't know that. It's because he wanted to be able to accomplish something somewhere, and he had to stay put to do it. He had to work where he was. And that's what we have to do. We have to work where we are and do what we can do. And some few of us will be able to work at a larger scale off in some other part of the world or coming out with big ideas. But we all work where we are. And that's the message I didn't. But a couple slides back, this one. I don't know if any of you were at that White House conference on cooperative conservation in 2005. You were there. It was in St. Louis, and there had been a previous White House conference, of course, that Teddy Roosevelt called in 1908. The White House Conference of Governors, it was called, that made conservation a national issue. And then there had been the Conference on Natural Beauty that Lady Bird Johnson was responsible for, that Lyndon Johnson called during his presidency. And then George Bush in 2005, his conference in St. Louis. And Leopold was really the touchstone for that conference. That title, Conference on Cooperative Conservation, comes from the subtitle of Leopold's essay on Coon Valley, an adventure in cooperative conservation. And practically every plenary speaker at that conference, and many of the speakers in the breakout sessions as well, was using Leopold and his kind of community-based conservation as a touchstone for what they were saying. And it was really a pretty inspiring conference. A lot of us kind of wondered how we were being used, if we were. But it was an incredible collection of people who were working at the community level all over the country. Yes?
At the University of Wisconsin, there was an educational radio station called WHA that was in the well, it's still going, but do you know if he was active in teaching on any of the programs they had on that station?
Now, that last sentence I didn't, was he active when?
Well, in the 30s and 40s, they had a school of the air, and they were using it to educate all the citizens in Wisconsin. And
Yes.
Did he have a program on that?
Yes. The question has to do with the radio station. It was a public station, WHA, at the University of Wisconsin, that was educating people through the School of the Air.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether his programs were on the School of the Air as such, but he had a regular radio program during the 1930s and into the early 40s. On broadcast on WHA, it was going out to farmers. He was talking about farmers and what they could do on their own land in Wisconsin. We have all the transcripts from those, and some of them were then recast into some of the early essays in Sand County Almanac, in the Almanac section. A couple of years when we were doing the film, working on the film, we had an email exchange, very interesting, that was going on called The Search for Leopold's Voice. We knew he had done all those radio broadcasts. He had also, we knew, had done a radio broadcast over WGN in Chicago. And we were trying to find his voice. We've never been able to find anything with Leopold's voice. And gosh, it was Stan Temple who came and lectured here about a year ago on Leopold and phenology and climate change. Had Leopold's chair at the University of Wisconsin before he retired a few years ago, and is now senior scientist for the Leopold Foundation, who was leading that effort. And he didn't leave any stone unturned. I mean, they were finding these old records that are in the archives and looking at all the labels, and then when they thought that maybe the labels had fallen off and something had been recorded over them, they started listening to some of these records. They just were never able to find his voice. But we know that he did the programs, and we know what he said. And that's all in the archives. I don't want to keep this going for too long, so somebody needs to shut me up when you think it's time. But yes.
I was just wondering what the demise of the small family farm, what sort of an effect that had, because I noticed he targeted like 100 family farms, according to the screen up there. So I just wondered, does that have a lot to do with maybe the failure of a lot of conservation programs, the fact that the small family farms?
I think it's tougher for small family farms because they're being, they're having to fight against this system, the marketing system that's been set up for the industrial agriculture, and all of the subsidies that are going to industrial agriculture through federal and state policies. But we still, in Missouri, have a lot of family farms.
That's what I was wondering.
And I think we have a tremendous potential. If we're going to turn this around anywhere, it's going to be a state like Missouri. And there's a lot of people who are working on it. So I'm not disheartened, but there's a degree of industrialization that certainly didn't pertain in Leopold's day, but we still have possibilities here.
In your opinion, what do you think the current status of conservation in Missouri is, and what are our current challenges and opportunities? What are some of the big things that could or might happen?
Okay, what do I think is the current status of conservation in Missouri? What are the current challenges and opportunities? I think, you know, we have a problem in this state with, and we've always had a problem in this state, with this skepticism of government, this distrust of government. But I think that has a positive side as well as a negative side. The positive side is that if you're not going to trust the government to do it, and you care about something, and Missourians do care about their environment, you know, I don't think Leopold, if you were coming to Missouri today, would say that as to attitude, there is none. I think Missourians do care. And I think they realize that if something is going to happen, they've got to make it happen. So they did make it happen. They voted in the constitutional amendment that set up the Conservation Commission. They voted in the conservation sales tax. They voted in the parks and soils sales tax. I hope they'll get the water fees turned around in this state someday. You know, we can do it. We can even make government more responsive. And for the small amount of money that we're willing to give to our government in this state, we have remarkably good, we're getting a remarkable amount of really good service from our government, I think. There's a lot of dedicated people in Jefferson City and in communities around the state. In spite of the abuse that sometimes gets heaped on them by skeptical Missourians and by people who, I think, you know, maybe prey on that attitude a little bit for political advantage also. So, you know, the challenge is to use our strengths, which are a population that cares, and local, you know, people who are willing to become active in their own local communities and try to expand their vision beyond their local community when it comes to voting, so that maybe we can work at a little bit bigger level also. But you know, ultimately we have to do what we can where we are. And I think that we have a lot to be proud of in this state, in our conservation administration, not just the Department of Conservation, which anyone would say is a leading department in the country. But I think there's an awful lot of good people and a lot of good stuff that's come out of the Department of Natural Resources also. And they really have been starved, you know, because by the legislature, the funding streams, because from people who don't like regulation and therefore want to starve the agency that's doing the regulating. And that's a challenge, that's a problem. But we have to keep at it. We don't just give up and hide our head in the sand. We just keep working at it. And Missouri citizens will come around. If we can get to the citizens directly, I think we can bring them around. The parks tax, you know, that has to be renewed, parks and soils tax that has to be renewed every 10 years. You know, when you can get 71% of the people voting for the renewal of that tax, that tells you something about Missouri citizens, right? So let's not give up.